Assalamu alaikum, beautiful book lovers and friends of BookBytes. And on this somewhat chilly Sunday evening, it's wonderful to have these amazing books to read. And I have a very fascinating debut novel called Lost Property by South African author, playwright, actor, and director Megan Choritz. Megan has spent all her life involved in making things up, she says. But Megan is also an activist. She sits on the board of directors and is very involved in the South African Jews for Free Palestine. So you would have heard her more in the activist space, speaking up, and definitely in the space of creating better social consciousness for more just society, both in Palestine and in South Africa. I look forward to getting into her mind, just having read all week Lost Property and really enjoying this very intimate novel. Welcome to the show, Megan. It's wonderful to have you. Wonderful to have a chance to chat to you. Welcome to Book Bites.
Thank you so much. I'm so looking forward to just hanging out with you and shooting the breeze.
Well, this is going to be a fun conversation, I can tell already, because having just completed this book this afternoon, I wanted to sort of savor the taste until now. And I sat through with it and just like kept it on my person all day, wherever I went. What a beautiful book. Congratulations on this beautiful piece of writing. And as a debut novel, such an exemplary piece of work, so soulful. Congratulations. Absolutely, congratulations.
Thank you. I love that. That's beautiful. Thank you for that. That's a high compliment.
So where did it all begin for you? Tell us about this journey of writing. You're a playwright, you're an actor. I know you're very involved in the theatrical arts. What did it take to move from that into the space of writing prose, writing a novel?
I've always written lots of stuff, and have always sort of allowed the story to dictate the form. And so this I knew was going to be a big story, and it felt like it was bigger than a sort of message-driven play, or it was bigger than a short story. It felt like it needed the sort of space and time to breathe in a kind of novel form. And so that's how I kind of started with that, and kind of just ended up quite organically writing it, so that it took the form of a novel.
I mean, when I read the novel, there's also this interplay between nostalgia and present moment, and I really enjoyed the timeline. Shifting timelines is not an easy task, but you do so very sort of musically, and it flows together so well. And I know there's an editing process, but how did you, sort of interrogate this movement as you were writing? Thoughts of delving into the mind of a younger person through memory, and an older person in terms of some amount of regret, but also connecting with this child who just sort of appears in her life. I thought that was so beautiful in the interplay in timelines and spaces. Speak to us about writing timelines.
I was lucky because that also happened quite organically. I started in a moment, and the opening of the book is exactly where I started. And after I'd written the first scene or first chapter, I was like, "Ooh, now what?"
Right.
And I was sort of caught by surprise. And I was lucky that certain elements joined. So, for example, the first scene ends in a drive, and then suddenly I was able to take it back to another drive, to a sort of childhood memory kind of experience. And then it's interesting because in a weird kind of way, drives and cars are often the impetus for the shift in the space and time of the novel. So it happens in those three very clear segments: childhood, marriage, and then post-marriage. And the post-marriage section is kind of present tense-ish, although it also sits very much in a kind of COVID recovery space.
But there's so many beautiful reflections that your main character, your protagonist, has, and I really appreciated that because timeline through memory and reflection is so powerful. It lends to the vulnerability of your character. It tells me that you had to be vulnerable in order to develop this character, and that's very beautiful. Speak to me a little bit also about your character growing up in sort of 70s, 80s South Africa. And this this brewing political consciousness, it's not very sort of direct, but there's these conversations she has with her father, this understanding of difference and injustice. She has a sense of injustice. It happens there in her consciousness. It happens in personal life as well.
Yes, I mean, I think that because the book is written in the first person, you can give Lane, the protagonist, a lot of leeway in terms of how she explores who she is and who she becomes, and so there is space to take the political into the personal, and then the personal into the political, and in her relationship with her father, and in relationship with her surrogate mother, her maid, her nanny, her guide. She's able to first unconsciously and then more and more consciously understand the crazy world that she's growing up in, I think.
And I think even as a young person, she's so aware of how her relationships impact on her. Because I mean, I don't see Merle as her mother as necessarily, the villain, but she's harsh somewhat. There's that harsh mothering when we're in survival mode, and she kind of finds that solace in Dora. Dora has amazing strength, nurturing, which is precisely why she's in the space, but she just has this extra motherliness towards Lane. I found that so beautiful, how that interaction happens. And then she relies on memories of Dora to be with Tina.
Exactly.
That was
And
beautiful.
and I think I certainly was very aware of and needed to take care of, not to create the mythical nanny maid kind of, the traditional story of the maid who is the maid, the friend, the whatever that. So that Dora was much more complex, and there was this idea constantly that she was leaving her own children behind in order to do this job of mothering other people's children because their mother was not able to. So I think that that's just that thread really describes what it was like being white in South Africa in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Growing up in white apartheid South Africa was the most bizarre state of kind of fake normalcy that there could be.
It is. You get a sense also from your character that there's this bewilderment because you're trying to make sense of the life you're living and the relationships you have with your primary caregivers. And then there's the stuff going on around you that's rather bewildering. And I feel that that's the impetus and then Larry's honest conversations with her is the impetus for her growing consciousness. I think you bring that through very successfully.
Thank you. I mean, it was very important for me that she had to deal with that stuff, and that stuff was going to come back and haunt her because, of course, from a position of privilege, we only our growing consciousness can only allow us a certain section of understanding, and that there's so much beyond that, and that that stuff is again she's tested by the impact of her own personal history and, of course, the history of everyone else in South Africa, and how she has to make sense of that. And I think that she's lucky because I think she's granted an opportunity to really take something terrible and go through it with a tiny flicker of hope.
She's very human about it. I mean, she has these thoughts of wanting to sort of get rid of what's causing her harm and evil, and that's a very normal human, the instinct of survival, you know. And we'll get to that. But I just wanted to add also that there's this feeling that, especially as a child, and maybe to some degree, you know, as adults as well, this feeling that someone out there is looking after things, someone out there will make the right decisions. We believe that we vote people into places of power, and hand over major responsibility, and then we know that that's not how the world works eventually, and we've seen massive injustices. So you get that sense that she's sort of like almost low-key angry that things are not being handled, sorted, that she's being bridled with this, you know, this responsibility in a way.
I mean, I think that that's often a kind of space. I think that anger, or that refusal to acknowledge, or possibly even the demand of that, is very much of the unconscious privilege, and that has to be dismantled in order for Lane, who I do think has capacity for growth and development, but that can only happen with her acknowledging, with her shame, with her understanding that her background, her history, her present is still very much framed in that privilege.
And you're obviously right, from the point of view of someone who's deeply, you know, taken more than just action to develop a social consciousness and to live that sort of ideology, and that sense does come through. So I hope that it's engaging readers in that way to start thinking about the privilege that we hold, to check our privilege in various, you know, from various sectors that we come from as well. I really saw that intimate kind of connection with the novel, for anyone reading it.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
So I wanted to really also talk about the birds, this whole metaphorical, metaphysical concept of the birds, because in her anxiety, she feels the flutter of birds inside her. She seems to have this gift in a way. I think of it as a gift because there's a sense that birds are watching, birds are seeing. Birds also hold so many symbolisms, as you obviously sort of um, signified through this novel in subtle and beautiful ways. Talk to us about these metaphors and these metaphysical associations with different kinds of birds in your novel.
So I think that it starts with birds as a kind of signifier, like literally, physically, the actual birds. And for me, there's this brutal moment in the book where Lane comes home from school and all her childhood home trees have been chopped down and the birds are freaking out. And so, and quite literally. But then there's also kind of the birds that reflect her inner turmoil. I've always had a thing for birds. I don't like contact with birds. I don't like touching them or feeling them, but I'm very aware of them and am quite sort of drawn to them and entranced by them. So they felt like a very good way of explaining inner and outer worlds. So you could actually you could rely on the birds and talk about the birds to explain other stuff. And so it started off quite organically, and then it became a device. And I was very grateful for it, because I think that you can squeeze a lot into a symbol or a moment, you know, whether it's violent or whether it's protective, or whether it's even just that moment where you come inside and where the sun has been bright and you come inside and you close your eyes and you've got all those little sort of light birds, you know. So I think it became a useful device. I don't know what I'll ever do when I write more and I need another one. I don't know what I'll do then.
I have the impression something will come to you because it was so interesting for me. They were not just incidental. No matter what you're going through, I think at some level we're noticing what our surroundings.
Yeah.
We might miss certain aspects when you just, when you're too much in your mind or you're too overwhelmed. But like the idea of crows specifically, or the flutter that she feels in her chest and she associates it with birds, I just found it such a powerful device in carrying the story onwards and in helping the reader to understand your character. I thought that was just amazing. So if this was the first novel, I think we've got a lot more, to look forward to from you as well. Are you writing anything new at the moment?
I am. I am writing something new. I'm probably halfway at the moment. And it's absolutely 100% totally 1000% different. I'm writing something that's kind of speculative dystopian.
Well, we do live a somewhat dystopian reality, so I can imagine there's a lot of inspiration for that as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, let's talk about the title, right? I was looking at the title again once I completed it because I was trying to situate. Lost property always reminds me of something to be found, obviously, but something discarded in a way. And so I want to know if I'm on the right track. Talk to us about your title and how you came about it. Was there a working title while you were writing the book, or was this always going to be the wraparound for this particular story?
I had the worst title in the whole world. And when I gave my publisher, Melinda, what I had written so far, the book was called Everything is Everything. And she was like, she read what I'd written and she was like, if you finish this, I will publish it. But there's absolutely no way that you can call it Everything is Everything. And she was, of course, she was 100% right. But I had written a play called Lost Property. And I said to her, I'm obsessed with that title. For me, that is a title that reflects what happens to somebody. And it also describes the houses that we lose and the homes that we lose and the people that we lose. And so for me, it was a very resonant title. And she was like, it has to be that title. So I said to her, well, I've actually got a play that's called that. And she was like, well, change the title of the play. We need this book to be that. And she was absolutely right, because the book grew into the title for me as well, which was really lovely. Once I had sort of made the decision and the choice that this was going to be the title, a lot of the second half of the book became more clear and vivid for me,
I think that
particularly
makes sense.
Tina.
I feel like a story comes with its title, almost like babies are born with a name, and you kind of get inspired to find the name, and somehow it just makes perfect sense because of this. I don't want to give away the plot line and obviously what happens, but obviously there's this movement through relationships and spaces, and the body's almost like this object, as in the theater of life, and just moving through. How much of that is choice and how much of that is destiny is really what came through when I was reading the story, which is very much what the kind of reflections that life gives opportunity to. So I found that coming through very strongly in this novel as well.
And that, I'm so glad, because that's very intentional. I think that the only thing that we can do is to try and make sense of the things that happen to us. And in the trying to make sense of the things that happen to us, we give ourselves a certain amount of agency. And I think that that's what happens with Lane. Is I think she really is someone who things are done to until she decides how to respond to those things.
I want to talk a little bit about her relationship with Dora.
Yes.
Because it's a very, very strong relationship. Talk to us about Dora's character and the relationship between Lane and the semi-mother figure that she finds in Dora Modise.
So I think with Dora, there's always the idea that there's this whole other world of Doras, and we get clues about this, and we get insights. She has her own children; they don't live with her. She has her Thursday and Sunday religion. that Lane has no access to, but kind of that there are hints at. But I think that Dora is also someone who is almost like she's the moral steering guide of someone whose parents are unreliable and absent and dysfunctional. And I think because Lane's mother is an unkind parent, that it's so much about her that obviously Dora witnesses that relationship in such an intimate way, and then has to almost navigate around that. But she has limited power. Obviously, she's, for all intents and purposes, an invisible somebody, and she has to negotiate her visibility in quite a complex way, growing up a young child, and having this influence on her. So I think it's a relationship that should be complex and can't be totally explained. It's the relationship between Dora and Lane is one that is the most closely based on something that happened to me. And obviously a lot of the novel is informed by my childhood, my time and place.
I found that Dora definitely brings an insertion of wisdom into this dysfunctional space. But like you said, she's very gracious about it because she also understands perhaps her position in a way. And yet there's this genuine love and empathy between Lane and Dora. And she has genuine emotion and sort of and love towards this child as she's growing up. So that
Very
really
much.
carries through. That carries through.
Yeah, and I think that the idea is that Lane, in retrospect, understands the enormous gifts that Dora gave her. In as much as she's guided by what would Dora do, how would Dora do things. Whereas with her own mother, I think it's definitely a case of having to, with Merle, she has to forgive her.
And she almost has to revisit. I find she has to revisit her childhood when Tina comes into her life, and that was really instructive. I mean, there is no such thing as coincidence. It's almost like the perfect timing, and one wonders if actually Tina needs her more or she needs Tina.
For me, that was vital. Is the fact that we don't know, and we don't, and that actually, I think towards the end there is the understanding that actually both of them benefit from this really strange relationship. And
it also yes,
that Tina and how Tina is with Lane is also a beautiful opportunity to separate out Joburg and Cape Town. So I think that the timelines are strongly different. Lane's childhood and Tina as a child, but also the absolute differences between Joburg and Cape Town.
And one aspect that brought me back to the title was Lane's almost ownership of Dora when Dora's child comes into the space for a while, when she comes for a holiday, and her treatment of her. And it's a very childlike sort of response or reaction, if you want to call it that, when she gets the little girl into trouble. But it's also the sense of Dora is mine. She's not supposed to belong to anyone else, which is a very innocent response and brings out a sort of ugly side in a way.
And this complete, for me, what's also interesting about that part of the story is how her own mother is completely complicit in perpetuating the myth that Dora is their property.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That understanding is there. I mean, this is precisely the concern we have with the concept of domestic labor being economized in a way. So, I mean, all of those commentary definitely comes through, but overall a beautiful, intimate reflection of two very different timelines, or perhaps even three different timelines, and the social consciousness and the personal, the vulnerable space that your characters observe is just incredible. And I hope that this is going to make its way into theater as well, because you definitely occupy these different spaces of reflection and expression. Can we hope to see Lost Property in the theater space?
No.
Okay, so
I think it's too. I think it spans too big a timeline and is too. There's too much going on for it to be a play. But I am thinking more that it might, maybe, possibly, hopefully, be a movie.
I certainly hope so. I can see this being very well received by audiences in the visual form as well, because there's a nostalgia and there's just a nuance to your characters that is so proudly South African. And something, like I said, is just evoking nostalgia and vulnerability in this very intimate way of writing your story that I think will connect with so many audiences. And I do wish to see more forms. But in the meantime, I'm going to recommend that people read this beautiful novel, because I know that it's going to be capturing quite a few of the award lists in the next few months to come.
Oh, from your lips, as they say.
Megan, it was an absolute pleasure to chat to you and to hear about your process, having read so closely and recently of this book. I thoroughly enjoyed the book, and I wish you everything of the best in your journey in writing, so that in future episodes we can hear more from you about your writing.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I've loved just hanging out with you. It's been so cool. Thank you.
Is it, can you give us a closing line on what's current in the activist space? I know that you're very involved with your work with SAJFP.
SAJVP.
Some quick comments.
So I'm so lucky, and I'll be the first to let everyone know that I've been invited as an activist, as a member of SAJFP, to the Open Book Festival, not as the writer of Lost Property, but as a member of SAJFP, to talk on a panel with Haida Eid and Naiti Ngubane, who wrote From the River to the Sea.
From the river to the sea. Right.
Yeah. So I'm very, very excited about the possibility of that intersection. And I'll also be returning to KZN to do another incarnation of Shakespeare to Gaza, which also really brings in the kind of creative and activist, sort of brings the creative and activist together, which is really cool.
So we know that KZN and the Western Cape have much to look forward to. I hope you find your way to Gauteng and bring us some of your brilliance as well. We have much to celebrate, even though it's early days in terms of the new ICJ ruling. And we pray for peace. We pray for peace in Palestine.
We pray, we pray, we pray. I mean, it's too long now. It really is. It's too long.
Thank you once again. We wish you great health, afia, and every goodness over the rest of the year. And I'm going to be keeping my finger on the pulse for anything new coming out from you. Once again, have a wonderful rest of the weekend, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much. I've loved your company.
And that's it. We heard from Megan Choritz of The Lost Property. Be sure to get a copy, and also watch out for her play Shakespeare to Gaza if you're in KZN, and the Open Book Festival, where a panel will be under discussion in terms of where to from here with the issue of Palestine. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.